Well, that was way more exciting than I expected a Thursday afternoon. That's got to be the most exciting Thursday afternoon I've had in a long, long time. I have to check. My watch has like the little heart rate thing. I have to see how the heart rate was showing on that one, because that was something else. And what it ended up being was a win for Pitt in the ACC Tournament quarterfinals. The Panthers advance to face North Carolina tomorrow in the semifinals at 7 o'clock after beating Wake Forest 81-69. Monster game from Ishmael Leggett. Huge game for Pitt defensively. Heck of a lot of fight to hold off Wake Forest at the end. And you know what's funny is Pitt was up 12 at halftime, 38-26. They end up going up 19 at one point in the second half. That lead gets whittled all the way down to 3. And when it boiled down to it, they matched Wake Forest in the second half, 43 points each to maintain that 12-point lead. Ishmael Leggett, 30 points. Blake Hinson had 20. Jalen Lowe had 11 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 turnover. Great game from him. Great game from a bunch of guys. I mean, there were a lot of contributions here. All over the place, really. They played 7 guys as they typically do. Zach Austin was really the only one who didn't do much at all. He had 2 rebounds in 9 minutes. He only played 9 minutes in this game. Let's see, did he have a block or anything like that? He had a steal and a turnover and 2 fouls in 9 minutes. Played really not at all in the second half. He played 2 minutes in the second half, and then Leggett came in and played the rest of the second half. Blake Hinson, Jalen Lowe, and Bub Carrington played the entire second half. Federico and Guillermo more or less split the second half, and I think Austin, maybe the majority of his time in the second half came playing as the center. I think it was just kind of how it worked out for him. But, I mean, look, we're not here to talk about Zach Austin. The reality is we're here to talk about Ishmael Leggett, and we're here to talk about a really impressive win, a really physical win, and at times, for the majority of the game, a dominating win for Pitt against Wake Forest. There's a lot of places to go with this game. So, we'll just start off by doing what we always do. Ask you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is where we have all of our Pitt video content. We have our daily morning Pitt videos, like the one we had today, where we get you ready for today's game. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night. We had a fun one last night with Jim Hammett and Matt Steinbrink and Stephen Gertz joining us to talk a little bit of Pitt basketball as a group. That was a lot of fun. And then we have these post-game shows that we do after every road basketball game, or in this case, a neutral court basketball game. And we're going to have another one tomorrow night, apparently. We'll be live after the Pitt, North Carolina game tomorrow night. That one's scheduled to tip off at 7 o'clock, so I'm guessing around 9 or 9:15 we'll be live to talk about the results of that one. And look, so much of our conversation between now and then and after that is going to be talking about the bubble and whether Pitt's in and whether they can get in and whether they're going to make it and everything. You know what I'll say? And I'll say it because I was just thinking about it as I watched this team, throughout the game today, early in the second half, and how they closed out the game and how they finished, how they played the entire first half. This game is a heck of a lot of fun to watch. This team is a heck of a lot of fun to watch. And obviously, for their sake, I like Jeff Capel. I think these are good players, good guys on this team. For their sake, I hope they make the NCAA tournament. Selfishly, I hope they make the NCAA tournament because I want to watch this team play more. I'm glad that we get to watch them play again tomorrow night. And I hope we get to see them play on an even bigger stage next week, because this is a fun team to watch. And they can do a lot of things really, really well. They obviously can score really, really well. They're a very good offensive team. Today, they showed some real defensive prowess in how they played against Wake Forest, particularly in the first half. And even in the second half, the way they dogged Hunter Salas, the way they were, really other than Cameron Hildreth was the only guy I felt who really had sustained success against Pitt. Hildreth finished with 23 points on 8 of 14 shooting, but Salas got to 15 points on 5 of 9 shooting. A good shooting performance, 3 of 6 from 3, 4 assists, but he had 5 turnovers, and I really felt that he was just limited by Pitt's pressure on him and the way Bub Carrington defended him, the way Ishmael Leggett defended him, I thought they did a great job on Salas. Efton Reed finished with 12 points on 5 of 6 shooting, but I felt like his impact was negligible. I mean, really, this was Hildreth, and then some key shots by Carr as they kind of went through it, and that's what ultimately got Wake back into the game. No, Salas made some big shots. I mean, there's no question about it. Salas keyed the run. He made 2 big threes in a row that turned a 17-point game into an 11-point game, and that was when it really got serious. And so Salas had a big part to do with that. He had a drive to cut the lead to 8 a little bit after that, and made a free throw to make it a 3-point game with 4 minutes left to play. But ultimately, I thought Pitt defended him really well and did a great job on Hunter Salas. The defense is what stood out in this game. They end up out rebounding Wake Forest 33-27. Pitt grabbed 10 offensive rebounds, got 12 second chance points out of it. Just a really strong performance from a team that was desperate for a win in a game featuring 2 teams that were desperate for a win. Pitt looked like the team that was more desperate. Pitt looked like the team that, I hate this cliche, but wanted it more. Pitt looked like the team that was willing to do everything possible to get this win. And I think when both teams realized early on that the refs weren't going to call much, I think both teams went for it. You know what I mean? I think both teams were willing to push the envelope a little bit. There ended up being 36 fouls called in this game, but Pitt had 4 in the first half, and Wake Forest had 5 in the first half, so 9 fouls in the first half, 36 total in the game, so you get 27 fouls. I mean, Wake Forest fouled a few times intentionally at the end there, and Pitt was able to more or less make their free throws, but especially in the first half, and even to some extent in the second half, the refs were letting them play, and I think both teams were willing to sort of lean into that defensively, and I think Pitt especially, and especially Ishmael Leggett, was willing to lean into that offensively and drive into contact and initiate contact. Ishmael Leggett was awesome in this game. I don't think there's any question about it. 11 of 18 from the floor. He made 2 3-pointers. He was 6 of 6 from the free throw line. He had 8 rebounds, no turnovers, played 35 minutes. The best game he has played at Pitt, and he was just outstanding. And one of the things we've talked about so much with this team over the last couple of weeks, especially since they've really gotten hot, is having those 4 scoring options, and I don't want to say you don't know who's going to go off on any given night. You can pretty much rely on Blake Hinson, who sort of quietly had 20 points today. But you just don't know, there's always going to be at least 2 guys who are on. And you don't know who those 2 are going to be. It's going to be Hinson and somebody. And you don't know if you'll get a 3rd guy or a 4th guy. Well, today, I keep saying tonight, it's just sort of a habit. They got the 20 from Hinson, and then Leggett was the other guy who was on, in addition to Lowe making some key plays, 7 of 8 from the free throw line. Like I said, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 turnover. Bub Carrington had 9 points, and I felt like they were some big points. He also grabbed 4 rebounds and had 2 assists. You got all those guys going, but this was Leggett's night to step up. This was his day where he just took over this game and just was not going to be denied. He was relentless in driving to the hoop, and was outstanding. And Wake Forest really didn't have an answer for him at all. And you know what? And I shouldn't even say that. It's not like they were perplexed. They knew what he was doing. They just could not stop Ishmael Leggett. I mean, he would not be denied going to the basket. It was and we've seen him do that all year. We've seen him be that sort of resilient, driving through contact, tough player. But today he just seemed to do it more than ever. You know what I mean? He did it in spades in this game, and I mean he won this game for them. He won this game for them, and it was fun. It was fun to watch. I got it. So I debated this if we should do it. I mean, what's the old saying? It's 5:00 somewhere. Well, it's 5:00 right here. And after an ACC tournament game, I know it's a school night. It's not even a school night. It's a school afternoon. But come on, guys. After a game like that, we have to put one back. So the way this might work out, let me see. Probably got one more pour in this bottle. So we'll have that at least for the ACC Tournament semifinals. And then if they win that, we might have to get something new out. But to Ishmael Leggett, 30 points, bullying his way in, and taking over a game. Winning this game, beating Wake Forest for Pitt, and helping them advance, keep those NCAA tournament hopes alive, and advance to the ACC Tournament semifinals. I don't even need anything to wash it down, right? I mean, let's not get crazy. It's only a Thursday afternoon. I had something here, but maybe we don't need anything to wash it down. Let's jump into the comments and questions. You guys have been jumping in here, and it's great to see. We already got a lot of comments in here. A lot of Mark Cadden says, Chris, you legend, bring out the booze. We got it, Mark. We got it. It's a Thursday afternoon, so what are we going to do? Listen, we got a lot of comments and questions already jumping in there. I want to get to as many as we can, but the key is if you want to make sure we read your comment or answer your question, be a super chatter. You can click the little $sign down at the bottom of the chat screen, and we will make sure we read your comment here. Joe New is the super chatter, says, yes, fun team. Would you say that for the whole season? If not, at what points did they become fun? I mean, like, the reality is, this is a team where a freshman went out and had a triple-double in the first game. They were fun pretty much from the start. Blake Hinson has been fun for a season plus at this point. You get that big game out of Bub right off the bat. There was the trip to Brooklyn, and obviously the Missouri game and the Clemson games were not good, but then they sort of respond to that with the backyard brawl. They fall into that slump where they lose 4 out of 5, and they respond to that by winning at Duke. Certainly since that Duke game, although, even in those, how many is it? 14 games or whatever, it's been 15 now since that Duke game, they still had the Wake Forest game in there where they lost by 30. So I just think it's been a fun team. I think it's exciting to watch these freshman guards as they continue to grow up game by game. It's fun to watch guys like Blake Hinson play and Ishmael Leggett play. And, I'm glad we get to see them for at least one more game, this week, possibly 2, if they can beat North Carolina tomorrow night, and then see what they do, after that. And along those lines, like Tommy Z has a comment here, says, not sure if this game moved the needle that much. Villanova's outstanding win against college basketball powerhouse DePaul might just keep them out. So, here's the thing, Tommy, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this win and I'm thinking about what Pitt accomplished today and I'm thinking about this team and everything, I don't know what this game did for Pitt's NCAA tournament chances. I guess it's a quad 1 win, right? I kind of don't care. There's a part of me that's just sort of in this moment right now, appreciating what this team did today, how they played, how they got their contributions, who led them to victory, and ultimately what they did on the court today. And the opportunity they gave themselves for a giant game tomorrow against North Carolina. And I sort of agree with the general thought that this game could have been an elimination game for Pitt. If they had lost, their NCAA tournament chances would pretty much be over. I don't know that they played them into the tournament, but I think that they avoided elimination as far as that goes, and they're living to play another day. They're surviving and advancing, and in the meantime, we got to watch a hell of a basketball game. Where Pitt dominated for, let's see, they went up 19 with 13-14 left to go. So for about 27 minutes, they dominated, and then Wake Forest pretty much took over. Pitt made one basket over the next, I don't know, they missed 8 out of 10 for the next, I don't know how exactly what the cutoff point is, because Wake Forest pretty much went on a run. They were on a 20-6 run over the course of the next 6 minutes after Pitt went up 19, and it really stayed back and forth at that point. It gets down to 3 points at 65-62, and who comes up with a big basket? Of course, it's Ishmael Leggett. Gets an offensive rebound and a putback to make it 5-point game. And then at the other end, Wake Forest ends up getting 2 offensive rebounds and getting a basket out of it to make a 3-point game. And then you come back down after Guillermo Diaz-Graham misses a hook shot where he got hooked in the eye. But Blake Hinson ends up getting a putback on the next possession to make it a 5-point game. Again, Wake Forest scores a free throw to make it a 4-point game. And then it's back and forth with Pitt continuing to have an answer. Ishmael makes 2 free throws. Wake Forest gets 2 free throws. And then you have, ultimately the run, because it's a 6-point game. It's 71-65. Actually, it's a 4-point game. It's 71-67 with 2 minutes left to play. Guillermo scores on a pass from Blake Hinson. Ishmael drives for a basket, and then just under a minute left, Jalen Lowe makes 2 free throws. And now it's a 10-point game, and Pitt is back in control, and they've won the game. They were able to make shots lately. I feel like there have been points this season where this team has gone cold in the final 4 minutes of a game or final 3 minutes of a game. This was not one of them. They were able to make the plays they needed to make in the final 2 minutes to come out with a victory. All right. I want to get into the chat as much conversation as we can here. I saw our guy Steven Gertz had a comment. We'll go to Steve real quick here from Panther-Lair.com. He says, lots of touches for Hildreth and Carr by design. Hildreth had a good game, but they didn't let the other guys, especially Miller, ever get loose. And yeah, I thought, as great as Ishmael Leggett was as far as scoring, I mean, he played great defense. Bob Carrington played great defense. Carrington didn't produce a ton in terms of offense. He had 9 points, but he played great defense on Hunter Salas throughout the game. Ishmael Leggett did that as well. I just thought they were aggressive with Wake Forest, and they brought a lot of energy. Both teams came out with a ton of energy to start this game, and I think you saw that come through on defense. That's why both teams were kind of cold in the early going. I think the under 16 media timeout came at like 14-18, and at that point the score was 10-9. There wasn't a lot happening offensively, but they started picking up a little bit. Pitt kept its intensity on defense, though, and the energy on defense, and really harassed Wake Forest. And I think that had as much to do with this win as anything. I mean, obviously, Ishmael Leggett had the most to do with this win. But that defensive energy and the defensive play, there's a lot that went into this, but that was, as much as anything. Let's see, Chevy Troutman had the first comment. It says, Ish Leggett, you dog. DC3 says, Ish to the rescue. Scott Eisenberg says, what a homecoming for Ish. Yeah, the DC area native, kind of game you would want to have when you're coming home and playing in front of the home crowd. Hog Muncher says, absolutely love this team. How can you leave us out of the tournament? So this is my thing. All right, this is my thing. When it comes down to it, you have 32 teams that get automatic qualifying spots, right, for winning their conference tournaments or however the conferences, send their, automatic qualifiers. That means you have 36 at-large spots. How can you convince me that this Pitt team is not one of the best 36 teams after those automatic qualifiers? That if you take those 32 automatic qualifiers out of the field of 340 or however much it is, and you look at the other 316 teams, how can you convince me Pitt's not one of the top 36? I just think it's hard to make that case. I'm going to write about this in the 3-2-1 column tomorrow. I don't know how you can make that case that Pitt is not one of the 36 best teams after those automatic qualifiers. That when you remove those teams, who's left, rank them all, and tell me Pitt's not in the top 36. Now, I know they didn't play any good games in November. I know. 4 months ago, their schedule was not good. But are they one of the best 36 teams in college basketball right now outside of those automatic qualifiers? Like, I don't know how you can't convince me they are not. And I feel like that's what it has to come down to. I mean, we talk about non-conference strength of schedule, and that's good and it's valuable and it should be considered. But I think you consider that when you have teams that are close in record, where you say, well, it was the challenging non-conference schedule is what ultimately left this team a couple wins shy of the other. But I don't feel like, I feel like when you look at the bubble and you look at Pitt, I feel like they're better than some of these other teams that are being talked about. It feels like they're a team that should be given an opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, I mean, I'm sure it's not just me. We're on a live stream full of Pitt fans after a Pitt win. You guys all agree with me. I don't have any doubt about that. Scott Mitchell says, super impressed by the defense. You're usually going to get punched back. It's just how you respond, and Pitt really responded well. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I kept wondering, right? So we've seen Pitt have double-digit leads in the first half. It's almost like it's better for Pitt if they are down double digits in the first half. I mean, I should look this up at some point to see how many times they've trailed by double digits at halftime and how many times they've led by double digits at halftime and what the end results of those games were. But it feels like, I mean, the game at home against Wake Forest, they were trailing by 10 at halftime, and they end up coming back and winning that game. They seem to do better in those situations than playing with a lead. And so this game, I mean, they're up a dozen. They go up 19, 7 minutes into the second half, and then Wake Forest goes on a run. And I think to some extent, you weren't going to keep Wake Forest, you weren't going to keep them under wraps the whole game. You know, I mean, you did a good job for most of the game, and you made some big defensive stops when it really mattered, you know, early, obviously throughout the first half, and then in the last few minutes, you made some big defensive stops, but you weren't going to keep them down the whole game. You knew that run was going to come. It was just a question of when and whether Pitt could answer. And the problem was, you know, Wake Forest obviously started making some baskets. After Pitt went up by 19, they had a couple misses, and then they got hot and made 8 out of 10. And at the same time, Pitt missed 8 out of 10. And so that was really how that run came together. Pitt needed to ultimately respond, and, you know, where was the point where they responded? I mean, it was sort of gradual. I don't know if there was really a specific turning point other than, you know, I guess kind of that sequence I talked about a couple minutes ago, where it got to 65-62 and Ishmael Leggett scores on a putback, you know, after grabbing an offensive rebound or two. And then, you know, Wake Forest scored again to make it 67-64, and Blake Hinson made another putback. You know what I mean? Another score off an offensive rebound. And so Pitt, its biggest baskets in the game, arguably, when the score got down to 3 points, came after they missed baskets. And Pitt was able to grab the offensive rebound and put back and score to push it back to 5 points. I mean, those were probably the biggest moments in the game. The Guillermo Diaz-Graham basket from Blake Hinson was huge. It turned a 4-point game into a 6-point game under 2 minutes. And then following that up with a drive from Ishmael Leggett, you know, was huge. And I'll tell you what, in between those two spots, so Guillermo made a basket on a dish from Blake that made it 73-67. At the other end of the court, Hunter Salas tried to drive and ended up missing, and Pitt got a rebound, and there was no foul called. And as you know, you could probably say this 2 or 3 dozen times in this game, there probably could have been a foul called, but there wasn't. That was a huge spot because down to the other end, Ishmael Leggett drove and scored, and it made it an 8-point game. That was a pretty huge sequence there as well. And so it wasn't so much about Pitt stopping the bleeding. They just finally found a way to start answering a few of Wake Forest baskets. They started getting a few, buckets. And that was where it really kind of, now I think when they face North Carolina tomorrow night, they're not going to be able to afford to let North Carolina go on a 20-6 run. They're going to have to be a little bit better than that. I don't think you can really afford that. But I'll say this, you know, that game at the Peterson Event Center against North Carolina, UNC gave Pitt an opportunity early in that game. Carolina wasn't hitting anything. They just weren't scoring. And Pitt had an opportunity to maybe take a sizable lead. They had a lead. They could have really put a big, space between them and the Tar Heels, and they weren't able to do it, and they ultimately end up losing that game. So maybe there's a bit of an opportunity there. And I don't know if anybody would actually admit this, but I do think that for Jeff Capel and Jason Capel, there's a little something extra when they're playing Carolina. Jeff, obviously, is a Duke guy, which I don't know if he would pretend like that's not the case, that he's a Duke guy, but Jeff as a Duke guy certainly has his own thoughts about Carolina. Jason, after the way he felt disrespected last year, you remember all that stuff at that game down in Chapel Hill? He's got a little something extra. And I think those two guys They get up for North Carolina, and Pitt's had some success against North Carolina under Jeff Capel. So, tomorrow night looks like that's going to be the one, blowing out the 4 seed. But I can see Pitt being game for this. I think it's going to be a good crowd. 7 o'clock tip-off. Certainly Carolina is going to bring out a lot of fans. And you know what? I'll tell you. I'll say this too. Pitt's going to put on the road uniforms because they'll be the visiting team as the lower seed or the higher seed, depending on how you look at it. Carolina is going to have a lot of fans in the building because Carolina is sort of second to Duke in terms of that fans who aren't necessarily in Chapel Hill, factor. It's going to be, I would imagine, it's going to be a hostile environment for Pitt. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. This team has shown that they play well in those environments. They almost embrace it. I asked Ishmael Leggett about this the other day, because I asked him about the culture of the team, and he talked about it's tight-knit, it's a brotherhood. And I said, do you feel like that helps you guys when you go on the road and you play in these tough environments that, you're out of your comfort zone, you're away from home? Do you feel like because you guys are so tight, you're able to sort of, I don't know, kind of mobilize together, so to speak? And he said, yeah. He was like, we found that we can really lean on each other. And look, if you go way back, as a Pitt fan, if you go 20 years ago, and our friend Mike with the great book, The We All We Got, I think this team, whether they say those words or not, embodies a little bit of that mentality. And I think it's helped them win 7 games on the road this year. And now, including this, if you want to include games away from home. But I think that's helped them play in hostile environments in front of hostile crowds. You saw Blake Hinson did that interview with Kelly Burkett from Channel 11 from PXI. And she was asking him about the Duke game, the game at Cameron Indoor, and he said about, it was weird at the beginning of the game. It was almost like they were being too friendly. I didn't like that. I don't want to be liked by the enemy. And so I made it my goal to make them hate me by the end of the game. That's the mentality. Like, I think these guys feed off of that negative energy. And I think because they are so tight as a team and they have those bonds, I think they're able to, they're positioned well to respond to that. And so I would imagine that the crowd tomorrow night is going to be decidedly pro-Carolina. And it's probably going to be a pretty sizable crowd as well. ACC Tournament semifinal game, North Carolina playing in it. Yeah, people are going to turn out for that one. And I think that's exactly what Pitt wants and maybe even what they need. I think it could work in their favor. I'm not going to sit here and predict a win. I mean, we'll see what I pick for the staff picks tomorrow, but I think it could work in their favor to have a hostile crowd at the game tomorrow night. All right, I'm got to get back to comments and questions here. I'm rambling and ranting and raving. Let's see here. Mark Cadden says that game almost killed me, but the boys took care of business. Josh Newark says best defensive performance by Ish since Jerron Brown. Man, that was impressive. Yeah, I mean, he did a great job, but don't leave Bub Carrington out of it as well either. I think Bub Carrington played really well defensively. It wasn't just Leggett guarding Salas. I mean, he guarded him a lot, but Bub Carrington had that assignment, and I thought did a great job, particularly in the first half against Hunter Salas. Hogmuncher says, shout out to the Tobacco Road refs for always finding creative ways to bring their boys back in it. Wild game from the refs. Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that the refs favored one team or the other. Wake Forest ended up with more fouls than Pitt. They had 19. Pitt had 17. But obviously, they were fouling intentionally at the end. I thought it was called fairly evenly. Which is to say, I don't think for the bulk of this game, they didn't really call anything either way. I thought there were plenty of times when Pitt could have been called for fouls and they weren't called. And I thought there were plenty of times when Wake Forest could have been called for fouls and they weren't. So I don't really, I don't think it was too unfair in the calls. There was one or two calls where I was like, oh, really? You're calling that? And there were one or two times where I was like, whew, Pitt kind of got away with one there. So I didn't feel like it was this is my thing about refs always, is like, I generally don't think they're too biased one way or the other. I just think they're missed calls in every game. And they usually more or less balance out. What was the next comment here? Wolf HD says it's a shame this game doesn't matter because the ACC is the worst conference ever created, and Pitt is far worse than a 15-loss Villanova. 22-11 in the pathetic ACC proves Pitt actually is terrible. Well, right now they're only 22-10. Wolf HD, don't give them that loss tomorrow just yet. They still could get to 23-10. Like I said, I can't even get too caught up in resumes and quad ones and net rankings and things like that right now. Like, there's a certain pleasure when the game actually starts. You know, when this game started today and we could stop wondering about the bubble and stop wondering about net rankings and stop wondering about non-conference strength of schedule, and we could just watch basketball. And we got a great game. You know, I mean, it was, you know, I think as a basketball game, not just for the result, but I thought the general outcome or just the general, like, course of the game, the flow of the game, particularly over the final 13 minutes, I thought it was a great game. And we didn't have to worry about any of those other things that we've all spent way too much time over the last 5 days and even more talking about. We could just watch basketball. And we'll get an opportunity to do that again tomorrow night. And I think that's pretty great. Homer Simpson says that was a game to be proud of. They played together even when it got close. They never let it bother them. Going to need that same energy for tomorrow's revenge game. Yeah, energy is going to be the key. Energy is what it's all about, particularly when you play on defense. But the ball has to move as well. They're fond of saying the ball has energy. They had 11 assists on 26 baskets. I feel like they probably need to do a little bit better. Only 3 assists in the second half. They need to move the ball. Now, Wake Forest was, I thought, really aggressive defensively, really brought a lot of energy as just like Pitt did. And so that was cutting off a lot of things. But they're going to need to move the ball well. They're going to have energy on both ends of the court. No question about it. This is a good point from Scott Eisenberg. Says the ability to deal with physicality in this game compared to when they played Florida is night and day. That's a great point, Scott. Because if you remember that Florida game, the big storyline was about how physical Florida was being with Bub Carrington. And Bub came in with all that hype after that triple-double and all this stuff. He'd been playing so well in the first 4 games. And then Florida got physical with him. You know, and they really jammed him up, and I think made it difficult. And some other and teams after that tried to replicate it, and some of the power conference teams that they faced were able to replicate it. And so that was a big storyline at that point. And you compare that to today, like you said, Scott, and you look at how Bub Carrington handled the physicality. You look at how Jalen Lowe handled the physicality. Certainly Ishmael Leggett and Blake Hinson handled the physicality. You know what? Shout out to Federico on Efton Reed, because I particularly noticed this early in the game. Reed tried to back down Federico, and our guy Steven Gertz can probably get the stats on this and tell us whether I'm misremembering. I don't recall too many baskets that Reed got by just straight backing down Federico and turning around for an easy layup. I mean, I remember one in particular. Let's see if I can see it. Might have been first 6 minutes of the game, where he tried to back down, and he backed down, and he ends up pivoting like 4 times and took 3 more steps and goes up and under the basket and all that. It was far easier for him in the game at Pitt to get baskets on Federico. Like, shout out to Federico for playing physically, playing tough, and showing some strength against Efton Reed and not getting pushed around. He still got pushed around sometimes, but not like he did in the previous games. So absolutely, I thought the physicality was a big step in the right direction. This team's battle tested. They've been through it, and they looked like it tonight. Pitt Chag says, protect Ish at all costs. Yeah, I would say Ishmael Leggett's becoming one of those guys that's really important to bring back next year. We talk so much about the freshman guards. Whether, Jalen Lowe and Bub Carrington, you're going to have to step up with NIL and get those guys to return. I mean, Ishmael Leggett's an important one, too. I would put him pretty high on the list. I think all 3 of those guards, you need to get those guys on this team next year. As many of them as you can. All 3 ideally, 2 if you have to. 1 if it's only 1. Hopefully it's not only 1. But, yeah, I agree. You got to get those guys back. Steak on the Grill says smash the like. Yeah, man. Hit the like button. Like and subscribe, right? Like and subscribe. Andrew Westby says the Duke game changed the season. I think they became fun when Jeffers had that monster dunk against Wake Forest. Yeah, I think that if we're talking about points where the season became fun, I'd say that's pretty high on the list for sure. That Wake Forest game, because that first Wake Forest game, the one at the Peterson Event Center, was fun because Pitt was down 10 at halftime. Efton Reed, with all the backstory there, was just dominating the game. And then they put in Will Jeffers. And Will Jeffers defends him really well and ultimately changes the game. And then gets a big dunk off an inbounds play. That was a lot of fun. That's a good point. Jeffers didn't play tonight. Scrolling through the Stephen Gertz chiming in again, says the screen navigation was excellent to meet the guards on the catch. The backside rotations were excellent too. John Kristofich says Joe Lunardi doesn't have Pitt in the NCAA tournament. Pitt may have to defeat North Carolina to make it to the tournament. Yeah, I know last week, and I repeated this a few times, Jim and I kind of agreed that Pitt needed to win on Thursday. This is what we said like last Wednesday during the live stream. We said they had to beat Wake Forest in the regular season finale, and then they had to win on Thursday. Whether that means they got 1 bye and 1 on Wednesday and then Thursday, or whether they got the double bye and 1 on Thursday, that's what they needed to do to get in. That's what Jim and I thought. But boy, you read all the stuff today, and shout out to Chris Carter, who had the article in the Post-Gazette where you interviewed Joe Lunardi and who else? Mike DeCourcy and Rocco Miller, talking bracketology. And I mean, the consensus there was that 1 win, being today's game, wasn't enough. That they would need to probably win a second game. And if they won a second game, if they got to the ACC championship game, particularly beating North Carolina, to do so, that would probably get them into the tournament. And even though there was some uncertainty about whether that would even lock it up, which is crazy to me. I mean, that's absolutely insane to me. If they go 23 and whatever, if they win 23 games, make it to the ACC tournament championship game after beating North Carolina, you can't leave them out. Like, what are we doing here? Are we trying to get the best teams into the tournament? Because I'm pretty sure that's a team that belongs among the best in the country, having an opportunity to play for a national championship. We'll see. You know what? I'm going to stick with what I said right from the start. It's just fun to be able to stop talking about all that nonsense and just watch basketball. We got to do it for 2 hours today, and it was great. We'll get to do it for 2 hours again tomorrow night, and we'll see how it goes. Paul Shapiro says, as in all sports, defense is the key to victories. Dex says, this is insane, bruh. Pitt needs to beat North Carolina to look great coming into the tournament. Homer Simpson says post-game coverage said they would put Wake Forest in the tournament over Oklahoma, so technically this is a good win. Well, it's a good win. I don't think there's any question about the fact that it's a good win. I think everyone would agree about that. It's just a question of whether it makes a move on the bubble. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be honest. I am going, and I actually recommend you all do this as well. Pay no mind to any of this crap tonight and tomorrow. Like just ignore it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't know. Okay? I don't know what today's win did. I don't know what tomorrow's game is going to do. So I'm just going to watch basketball today. I'm going to watch basketball tomorrow, and when they lose, whether it's they lose to Carolina tomorrow night, or if they win and make it to the ACC championship game, if they lose, then I'll start wondering about the bubble again. Obviously if they win on Saturday, then they're in. But until they lose, I'm just not going to worry about it. Tomorrow's Friday, man. You might have a job. You might have stuff to do. Don't waste any of your brain space on the bubble. there's just nothing to be gained from it. I mean, if you want to pay attention to like what teams to root for, you want this team to win, you want that team to lose, whatever, fine. But like this haggling back and forth, and you know what? In particular, I'll say this: just ignore Lunardi and all these guys. Just ignore it. Like there's no matter how much attention you pay to these guys tonight and tomorrow, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change anything. You can find better things to think about. Watch highlights of this game. Go scout North Carolina. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of other things you can spend your time and your brain space and your bandwidth on. Just ignore it at this point. All right? Pitt just played a great game to win a rubber match against a team that beat them by 33 points less than a month ago, with a 30-point performance from Ishmael Leggett, a 20-point performance from Blake Hinson. Really good defense on a really good offensive team. Held them under 70 points. Like, enjoy all of that stuff. And think about Carolina. And you know what? Go watch the highlights from the game at Carolina last year when Federico, really kind of, I don't want to say dominated Armando Bacot, but did a really good job against him. Just focus on that stuff. I just can't. Why waste the brain space on Joe Lunardi and the rest, you know? Matt Presto says, talk about making an absolute statement on being the sixth man of the year, and what a defensive effort. Relentless, but it got marred by a lopsided officiating in the second half. Steak on the Grill says it's a quad one win against a team that was directly ahead of us in the bubble race. Absolutely meant something. We're rooting for Colorado and Texas A&M to lose tonight. ZC717 says if this team can get in, teams should be aware because Pitt has the type of guards that are built for the NCAA tournament. Either way, it's nice to see Pitt basketball rising again. Scrolling through here. John Cream says the eye test Pitt is in the tournament. I mean, I tend to agree with you, but we all know it's not just about the eye test. Willat Harris says, Chris Peak, my wife got paid yesterday. Hey, thanks for the $2, man. I appreciate you. Andrew Westby says, Blake Hinson's block to the low layup saved the collapse. Hinson played like today was the last game of his life. Never seen him or anyone that active on defense, especially helping out on double teams. Yeah, Jalen Lowe went coast to coast after a Blake Hinson block. And that's, that was a key point. I think that's the one you're talking about, right? That was a key point in the game. I feel like Hinson had 2 blocks. Let me, yeah, Hinson had 2 blocks and 2 steals. Blake Hinson, here's his stat line. 20 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals. Shot 6 of 12 from the floor, 4 of 6 from 3, 4 of 5 on free throws. Played 39 minutes. Blake Hinson had a great game. Just overshadowed by the guy scoring 30. Let's see. Finkel Entertainment says, if we lose to North Carolina, we'll be sweating a little bit on Sunday, but we should at least be in the playing game. If we beat Carolina, we are taking a good seed. I think if they beat Carolina, they should be in. I don't get how they would be left out. Patrick Gall says, I'm not too worried about the Carolina game hurting our chances for the NCAA tournament. Duke killed us in last year's ACC tournament, and it didn't seem to matter. Yeah, but that team last year sort of entered the ACC tournament with more, like they seem to be closer. You know what I mean? Like they were, they weren't viewed as being this far off the bubble, I think, entering the ACC tournament last year. So it was a little bit of a different situation. Steak on the Grill says, I love the way Bub and Lowe and Ishmael Leggett understand clock and ball control possessions down the stretch. How many times did we see X and Trey jack up a quick dumb 3 up 7 with 5 minutes left? I don't know. It was a long time ago. I don't remember. I'm sorry, John. I don't remember. MW Pitt says, does Lunardi think only 3 get in from the ACC? Otherwise, it is us. I can't see, Jim said this last night on the live stream, I can't see the ACC only getting 3 teams in. Like, it just seems shocking to me that there could only be 3 ACC teams in the NCAA tournament. I just have a hard time seeing that happen. I agree. And so, I mean, if it's after after Carolina, Duke, and Clemson, you're talking about Pitt and Virginia. You know what I mean? Wake Forest drops now. But, Pitt would have to be above Wake Forest at this point. So then it's Pitt and Virginia. Patrick Gall says Ishmael Leggett getting Efton Reed into foul trouble was huge as well. Took Wake Forest offense out of the rhythm they were in. Yeah, that helped. It definitely helped to get Reed into foul trouble. He had 4 fouls in the game. Played 26 minutes. Like I say, I just thought I thought Federico defended him really well. Also, I'm just gonna fly through as many of these as we can. Steak on the Grill says team defense and rotation on Wake's perimeter passing was downright joy to watch. MW Pitt says, come on with the ref bashing. We certainly got some really favorable calls in the first half. Yeah, I agree about that. I think the calls went both ways. Steak on the Grill says Efton Reed committed 25 fouls, only called for 4. I hate the difference in calls from the first and second half. Be consistent. Yeah, I think everybody could see that coming. When they only called, 9 fouls in the first half, 5 on one team, 4 on the other. You knew it was going to be called tighter in the second half. You knew that they were going to be in, I think Pitt was in the bonus. What is it? Like 12 minutes into the half, around at 7:37, Blake Hinson shot a 1-and-1. So you knew that the calls were going to come. They were going to call it a little bit tighter. It was just inevitable that was going to happen. And you end up with 27 fouls called in the second half. And again, some of those were intentional that Wake Forest took at the end. But, I mean, you knew that was going to happen. A lot of comments. I want to get through as many as we can, but, we're getting past that 45-minute mark, which is our post-game stretch here. Chris is a super chatter, though, says, Chris Leggett balled out. So proud of our boys. Yeah, I mean, Ishmael Leggett had a great game, and a lot of guys did. Jordan L. says, but how was Pitt's non-conference schedule? That's what stood out to me as I watched Pitt clap Wake Forest. So, that's exactly my point. I think that's a great comment, Jordan, and that's exactly what I'm saying is, for 2 hours there, we could just think about Ishmael Leggett scoring 30. We could think about Blake Hinson scoring 20. We could think about Carrington and Leggett defending Hunter Salas. We could think about the rebounding. We could think about all of those things. And we didn't have to think about how, they only played Jacksonville State or whoever they played in the non-conference. We didn't have to think about those things. We didn't have to hear about those things. I mean, occasionally, Billis and Schulman talked about it a little bit, but we didn't have to think about that. Look, I said this on Twitter, okay? Don't take anyone seriously who calls Pitt Pittsburgh. I mentioned that Post-Gazette article, and all those guys just kept talking about Pittsburgh. Well, I think the thing that Pittsburgh needs to do, man, Pittsburgh's a city. The college is Pitt. We've hit that point in the post-game show where we are just sort of ranting on those things. Bill Florigen is a super chatter, says, great insight as always, Chris, a nice win. I'm tad concerned with having good leads and letting them dwindle late, but very positive nonetheless. Yeah. So I think you can kind of look at it however you want to look at it because they did. They had a big lead, let it dwindle down, but they made big plays to come back. You'd like to think that they get up 19 on Carolina. They won't let Carolina come back into it. But as you move forward and you get further in the ACC tournament and ideally the NCAA tournament, you're going to keep facing better and better teams, which means like Wake Forest showed today, even when you're up 19, you've got to battle to hold on, and it's a credit to Pitt that even though they let it get down to a 3-point lead, they were still able to fight and hold off and make some big plays and come up with some defensive stops and come up with some baskets and free throws at the other end to still get, to match Wake Forest scoring in the second half. Because sometimes in these games where you get the big lead, and then it gets whittled down, you end up with that other team ends up outscoring you in the second half. They were better than you in the second half. Well, that wasn't the case here. Pitt still matched Wake Forest 43-43 in the second half. And I'm pretty sure the over hit too. ACC tournament, man. I feel like there's probably only one game where the over didn't hit. So, If you're into those kinds of things, I would say the over is has been a safe bet so far in the ACC tournament. But yeah. All right. Let's see. I think we might call it here, folks. Listen, make sure you like this video and subscribe to to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll have a post-game show tomorrow night after the North Carolina game. That's going to be a Friday night. That's not a school night, folks. So depending on how that one goes, this right here might not be enough. We might have to have two bottles for that one. But listen, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We got a lot of stuff for you right here. Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We have live shows every Wednesday night. We have our post-game show that we're going to do. And then, of course, lots of coverage at Panther-Lair.com. Jim Hammond is in D.C. for the ACC Tournament. He'll have a lot of coverage from the game, and we'll have all kinds of coverage to get you ready for Pitt, Carolina tomorrow. Pitt beats Wake Forest. 4 seed advances to face number 1 seed North Carolina. It's an 81-69 victory today. They live to fight another day. They'll put on the blue uniforms, presumably. Maybe they'll bust out the All Blacks. Who knows? We'll see what they come out with tomorrow night to take on Carolina. But good win for Pitt. The Panthers survive and advance. They're 22-10, and they will take on the Tar Heels tomorrow night. We'll be live after that game to talk about it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe. We appreciate it, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the morning Pitt, and then tomorrow night for the live stream. Thanks, everybody who tuned in. Thanks getting in all the comments and questions in the super chatters. Have a good rest of your Thursday night. Enjoy some basketball. Don't worry about Joe Lunardi and those guys. And we'll talk to you tomorrow right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.